Welcome everybody. Congratulations to those of you who managed to get to a session at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. My name's Alex Graham. I'm Chief Executive of Wall-to-Wall, independent production company, and chairing this session. Just before we start, I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to introduce a distinct, I know everybody says this, that they've got a distinguished panel. We really do have a distinguished panel this morning. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to run a little clip. Sort of 5 minute, well, it's a little 5-minute reel really, which has about 120 programs on it, just to give you a sense of the range of stuff that we're dealing with. We're then going to have a little bit of fun, in the sort of Blue Peter sense of fun, which you've all got under your chair. You should have, and if you don't, you should have 2 little voting cards, one of which says Fact Ent and one of which says Doc. So we're going to do a little, I'm going to get you to vote on a series of titles, just to try and establish whether there is any consensus about this. I'm then going to reveal the panels, or at least some of the panels. Sean has joined us very late, so Sean will not be part of this game, sadly, but he can chip in if he wants to. I'm going to reveal what the panel's view about these particular shows is. And then we're going to take it from there and try to drill down into some of the issues around the debate around factual entertainment versus documentary, the current state of the television schedules, and so on and so forth. There will be lots of time, I hope, for Q&A. But what I would say is I don't want you to be feel so terribly polite. No one, I'm glad to say, is delivering sort of prepared speeches here. So we're going to try and make this a conversation and hopefully a lively debate. And that includes you, really. So if you are outraged by anything that anyone on the panel says, or indeed inspired by anything that anyone on the panel says, feel free to chip in at any point. Just put your hand up, and I will kind of clock you, hopefully, and ask you to contribute. So we will have a kind of specific kind of Q&A session towards the end, but if you want to be part of the debate earlier, don't hold back, is my... So, our panel, on my far right, and only geographically, I think, well, politically, but we'll find out later, Robert Thuckle, who many of you will know. Robert's company is called Troubleshooter TV, which I think is in part homage to one of the really great shows that he was involved in making with Sir John Harvey-Jones many years ago. Those of you, the late, lamented Sir John Harvey-Jones. But of course Robert himself now has metamorphosed into a troubleshooter of sorts himself, going in and helping hapless producers like myself who don't quite know how to make their television programmes work. He was a series editor of Jamie's School Dinners, which won him yet another BAFTA. How many BAFTAs have you got now, Robert? 4. Just the 4 then. And he was also voted Britain's #1 television producer in Broadcast Magazine's annual list of the hottest 100 people in television. So you see how grateful we are to have him on the panel. Robert's now building a career on acronyms. He produced a book and has done very successful presentations around the acronym CONFLICT, C-O-N-F-L-I-C-T. And tomorrow, I believe, subject to his voice holding up, he is debuting his latest acronym, which is A-U-T-H-E-N-T-I-C. So I'll leave you to work out what that stands for. Next to Robert, Dominique Walker, a commissioning editor for Factual Entertainment. So we know where Dominique's coming from, hopefully, in this debate. Dominique is commissioning editor for Factual Entertainment Channel 4 and responsible for My Fake Baby, Jamie's Foul Dinners. Dominique worked in the documentaries department before she went to Factual Entertainment, and interestingly was responsible for the new talent strand, The Other Side. And I think that's something that I want to hopefully we get a chance to talk about this morning, which is about how the current state of commissioning impacts on the next generation of filmmakers. Next to me, on my immediate left, and joining the panel at very short notice, I'm very grateful to him, Sean McAllister, whose bio says here rather interesting, worked as a welder and a pea processor, presumably not at the same time, before eventually finding a career as a filmmaker. Sean has a film in the festival, which is screening tonight at 6:30, called Japan, A Story of Love and Hate. So if you get a chance to go and see that, that'd be good. Next to Sean, we have another distinguished documentary filmmaker. Some of you, a lot of you hopefully would have seen, Mark made a film which was part of the White season on the BBC earlier on this year, called All White Embarking. A tiny little clip you'll see as part of our compilation in a minute. I thought, you know, this is the one point in which I will stop being, for a moment I'll stop being an impartial chair. I have to say, you know, I thought it was a fantastic film and quite a lot more entertaining than quite a lot of programmes that have entertainment in their label. Mark is guest tutor at London Film School and the National Film School. And then finally, last but not least, Benita Matowska, who's creative director at Electric Sky, which is a company which works both, I mean, a little bit like Wall to Wall, works in both documentary and formatted programmes. She set up Suitcase Productions, which was a New York-based documentary producer, and was then poached by BBC New York to series produce the Emmy Award-winning format While You Were Out. So that's our panel, and what we're going to do now is we're going to show a little 5-minute reel, just really to give you a flavour of the sheer range of programming that masquerades as factual entertainment, documentary, and all things in between. We run the clip.
Yeah, listen, it's preference.
Yeah, but what does it mean? What does preference mean, though? There must be some...
I'd be more comfortable if one of my own lived next door. That's nothing to do with racism or anything of the sort. It's just personal preference.
But you don't know that person more than any...
I don't care whether I know them or not. I still prefer my own people.
But why?
Because it's my personal preference. I don't know why, but it's my preference.
What we're going to do with your lungs is try and figure out the biological age. That's the difference between your birth age and how they are in biological terms. We're going to do that with each and every organ.
Welcome to the world of reborns.
Reborning means bringing a doll to life. You can have breathing mechanisms, you can have a scratch, you can have raised capillaries. You strive to reach the ultimate in realism. You're trying to create a baby.
Very clever lady. Oh, she's beautiful. She's happy.
He may not look it, but Czech White is one of Britain's richest men.
Get close, get their confidence. Get the confidence of the parent, the confidence of the child. Abuse the child. Child sees you're close to the parent. Won't say anything to you because you're so close to you're so close to the abuser.
From that point onward, I changed. I became somebody at 11 who completely split off, and I had a secret life. I suddenly had big secrets.
I had to wipe my bum by showering. The only way to do it. There was no way of reaching to wipe my bottom.
Can I have a look at the size of your tummy?
Yeah.
Ricky was eventually referred by his GP to see Shaw Summers. He told Ricky that a gastric bypass operation was the only hope he had of losing weight.
I don't like it. It's what they've been driven to.
What, dairy farmers?
Well, they've all got to find their niche, how they can continue farming. They've got to go either a lot bigger into like a factory farming state with 1,000 cows, which is going to happen on a lot of farms. And the small farmer can only go one way.
Maddie's finally strapped in so the family can leave. With Supernanny keeping a watchful eye from behind.
Oh, she slapped Flynn right across the face.
Everyone seems to be like saying, are you two in love? Are you two dating? No, I don't really like it. I'm going to pretend that I've dumped you, and then we'll have a secret love life.
Will you just talk to us a minute? So what have you decided, you two?
I've dumped him. Yeah.
The really difficult thing about neurosurgery is knowing when to operate. The actual operating isn't so difficult. But the really difficult thing is balancing the risks of the operation against the risks of not operating.
This whole Ministry of Food thing, it's got to gather pace now, otherwise it's going to fall on its arse. So I thought I'd go straight for the jugular.
I'll be doing steak studies over there for all you fat bastards, all right?
So we've got the 21 best British young mathematicians that we can find and a similar number of strong Hungarian students. We come together in the winter for a mathematics camp.
Next 16. Positive.
We do problems together, we have lectures, play mathematical games, and we just have fun.
Team 3. Oh, entirely incorrect. Go away.
I want to look back over my family tree, the family history, because both my parents are dead, and I know so little.
Morning. I'm here to mount a coup against Britain. Is Tony M by any chance?
No.
Is he?
No. Well, as you can see, a pretty extensive range. Okay, we're going to play a little bit of, the lights up, a little brief again before we get into the serious bit of the discussion. Have you all got your voting cards? So I'm going to just run through. We're going to take about half a dozen, otherwise we'll be here forever. Shows which, I mean, hopefully you've all seen. Obviously, if you haven't seen them, you're not allowed to vote. And what I want you to do is, I want you to. I'm going to ask first of all to hold up those of you who think that these shows are a documentary, then if they're factual entertainment, and then I want you, if there are those, it is entirely possible, because we did allow our panel to say that these were neither documentary or factual entertainment, but somewhere in between. And I suppose the best way to deal with that is that we'll take that as a third option, and you can hold up both cards at once if you feel that they're somewhere in between.
It wasn't actually somewhere in between, Alex, it was other.
Other?
So it could be beyond documentary,
Okay.
beyond factual
All right.
entertainment.
I'm sorry.
We were asked.
Yeah, okay. Robert, okay. Other then. So let's start with Secret Millionaire. Those of you who think Secret Millionaire is a documentary.
I was asked.
Oh, documentary or fact. Yeah, well, hold that. Yes, let's have them all up at once then. So I would say fact. That's pretty overwhelming, I'd say. I'd say it's about 4 or 5 people who thought it was a documentary.
No, I said not.
About 4 or 5 people thought it was a documentary, almost everyone else. Anyone who thinks it's beyond factual entertainment or documentary, anyone thinks it's an other? No, nobody thinks so, okay. So Amazon with Bruce Parry. Those of you who have seen Amazon with Bruce Parry. Doc or fact end, let's see.
50-50.
People put the hand, you put yours up and then took it down again. That's not Is that because you remembered you hadn't seen the show? Oh, I see. Okay. It's all right. All right. So, all right. So let me see. Just keep them up so that we can get a sense of this. I would say that's probably almost as overwhelmingly a doc as Secret Millionaire was fact 10. Slightly,
no, it's not.
Slightly more.
No, it's not. There's 11 fact 10s. There were 11 up.
We need an official count.
About 7.
Someone come down. They've changed.
Well, it's definitely. So there's a majority think it's a documentary.
Only just.
Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. Fact 10 Todd Doc. Oh, I think that's so nobody's. Oh, somebody's. Is that? There's an other in there. I can see something. It's a couple of others, but nobody thinks. Right, Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares is a documentary by any stretch of the imagination. Meet the Natives. This is quite interesting. I think this is more 50-50, I would say. Can everyone and let's just keep your hand up if you are holding up both. I just want to get a sense of those who thinks this is the sort of who's witnessed an other. Okay, there's a few people in there, but I'd say otherwise actually you're pretty split. Half of you think it's a documentary, half of you think it's factual entertainment. Okay, a couple more actually. Jamie's School Dinners, as opposed to Jamie's Ministry of Food, which we'll come on to in a minute. Jamie's School Dinners, fact 10 Todd Doc. It's interesting. That side are all pretty much fact 10. There's a big clutch of docs in the middle, and then slightly leaning to fact 10. Yeah. But quite a lot of those. Again, the audience is split down the middle to some extent on that. And then Jamie's Ministry of Food as opposed to School Dinners. I think, pretty much. No, there's not. There's only about 3 or 4 docs that I can see. Much more fact 10. Ministry of Food. Okay. Well, interestingly, the panel was equally divided about some of these. Robert and Benita thought Secret Millionaire was a doc. Dominique and Mark, sorry Sean, you weren't part of this, but anyway. Dominique and Mark thought Secret Millionaire was factual entertainment. Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, the panel was pretty, apart from Robert, who I think thought it was other, and maybe we can talk about what other means later on. But Dominique, Benita and Mark all thought it was factual entertainment, so pretty much in line with you. Interestingly, Robert and Benita thought Jamie's School Dinners was a doc, but thought that Jamie's Ministry of Food, on the other hand, was factual entertainment. I think Mark thought both of them were factual entertainment. And Dominique thought they were somewhere in between or other, depending on the definition.
Somewhere in between was what I was
somewhere in between. So there is that. I mean, I think that we could spend all day talking about this. I think the important thing is that there is no obvious consensus either in the audience or up here. Now, I'd like to explore with the panel. Let's start with Robert as a man who has a reputation, deserved or otherwise, as a sort of format king. I mean, what are we talking about? Can we just try and, before we get into the slightly broader debate, try and define some terms? And I'm going to come to each of you in turn and just get a sense of what you think. And indeed, for that matter, to what extent does this distinction matter? I mean, to what extent is it meaningful at all? How would you define, Robert, the difference between documentary and factual entertainment? Is it about form? Is it about format points? Or is it about subject matter? Or is it something more elusive than that?
Well, I didn't have a clue how to do it, actually. So what I did is I just looked at which departments the programmes came from, and I put down the departments they came from. Because Jamie's School Dinners came from documentaries, Jamie's Ministry of Food came from factual entertainment. There you have it. I've never been able to understand at all. When I made The Dome, Trouble at the Big Top, it was put up for an RTS award, the RTS Features Award. I was on the panel, 4 people that was nominated, sitting discussing the finalists, and the other 3 said it couldn't be there because it wasn't a features. And yet Blood on the Carpet had won a BAFTA for features the previous year, which was the most documentary thing you can possibly think of. So if even the awards people are completely confused, and they've given up that difference in RTS this year, they've got a new award for Constructed. Meet the Natives was put in for features, but they fought to move it to a doc. So I don't really understand. What I do understand is that there are programmes that are entertaining and programmes that aren't entertaining. and I want to be entertained by any kind of programs. There are also factual programs that don't ring true at all, that are very artificial, and factual programs that do ring true. I suppose if you go right across the whole gamut, there's game shows and X Factor sorts of shows. Are those docs or fact ent or something completely different?
Ent.
Right. So therefore there is ent and then there's factual. And if you think about it, in the olden days before Channel 4 and Dominique were born, in the 1970s, the BBC had had a department, well, through the 80s and so on as well, called documentary features. That was the department that made the factual stuff, and then there was science and arts elsewhere. And I actually think it's a great shame that things get divided up, because I think the best documentaries need a bit of entertainment, not artificial entertainment, but need to be entertaining. And I actually think that the factual entertainment programs need more rigor and truth about them to work. So, sorry, deeply confused.
But there is, okay, but so are you saying then that you think it would be a better world if we just we swept all these labels away? Is that what you're saying?
I think it'd be a much better world I think it'd be a much better world actually if the documentaries department, as it used to, was making the sorts of things like wife swaps and so on, so that you got the mixing of those two sorts of things together. And a wife swap can be a fantastic documentary. Fine, it's made within the limits, but a painting can be made within limits, or a book can be made within limits. And the fact it's made within limits doesn't stop it being a documentary.
But, okay, well, come on, I'll move on in a minute, but just one more, I mean, I can understand that, but if you take, I mean, and I can see that, you know, and it's interesting that a lot of the shows that the shows we've got people to vote on are kind of interesting, have some hybrid elements, and that's partly the reason why I think people are not quite sure what to call them. On the other hand, there is also wouldn't you accept that there is a kind of distinction? If you take, you know, the kind of films that Mark and Sean make, you know, as opposed to, say, Supernanny. I mean, I'm not making a judgment here about which is better.
Yes, of course, along a whole line.
But there is clearly, I mean, if you look at those shows, you would say, as an audience, you'd recognise there was something different about them.
Well, of course you would. There's a whole long line, and they're fantastically good. That's what's different about them. And they're very wonderful and moving to watch. And they tell you something about the human condition, and that's what's different about them. And there is, of course, a huge continuum. But to put an arbitrary line somewhere in between, yes, at one extreme end there are documentaries. What's The Family? That's supposed to be unmediated, just watching things as they are. So is that the absolute documentary? And at the other end, what about the most artificial formatted show you can think of? I don't know, do you think what it is? Is that fact ent? Well, maybe there are extremes, but actually I find it very difficult. And I would prefer that there were factual programs of many different kinds.
Mark, I mean, from your perspective, in terms of the kind of, I mean, do you find these distinctions? I mean, are you with Robert that actually these distinctions?
I mean, they exist for broadcasters, and you know, and maybe they're categories that don't really help anybody else other than broadcasters, really. I mean, they're sort of unnecessary. You could bring it down to, I mean, I wrote like the kind of things came to mind when you watch the clips, and you know, for me, documentaries are proper documentaries, creative documentaries, can be universal. It's about different kind of tone, the time they take to make, time you invest with your characters, and all those kind of things. And we could go on debating, you know, which is which forever, but I think most people recognise what has more quality or more kind of substance, you know, and can exist for, you know, there's a reason why you watch a formatted show and you can do the ironing or, you know, be changing the baby's nappy at the same time. I mean, in many of those clips you had this slightly kind of sexed up narration and, you know, some of the subject matters, you know, big fat man. I mean, these are things that appeal to kind of the sort of lowest common denominator in many ways. Not to say that some of them, you know, I'm not making the judgment they shouldn't exist at all. They do exist and that's fine, but I would never ever call them documentaries. I mean, they're just, and the danger is that people forget what, you know, what creative documentaries are and what their roots are and where they come from and what it means and the time that they take to make and, you know, all those kind of questions really. So categories are just categories. They're there for departments in broadcasters, you know, within broadcasting institutions, and you know, I don't think we should get obsessed by that.
Okay, I'm going to come to broadcast in a moment. Sean, I mean, would you pretty much agree with Mark? I mean, do you think these labels are useful, or just the broadcasting?
The only thing about the space on television is that it's that if it's taken by the most entertaining documentary, if it's all one genre, then we'll get squeezed out. In a sense, that's that.
Well, you are being squeezed out.
We are being squeezed out or pushed out of the schedule, I suppose. I kind of think about what the audience considers. Actually, I think when we're having this, listening to this discussion, I kind of wonder what the audience think at home. What do they think? Are they watching a documentary when they watch Jamie Scudden? I think they probably think they are, and in that sense, that maybe they are. And also, if Jamie Scudden is changing things in the Houses of Parliament in the way that documentaries did in the 60s and 70s, then maybe that is the force of change now. Maybe that is the kind of...
and that's not a bad thing.
Well, not at all. And it's very entertaining, and it's doing what documentary was doing in its day. I don't know, maybe things are just moving on, but we're dinosaurs within the movement.
So Dominique, I mean, you are the commissioner editor of the Factual Entertainment department. So why is your department called Factual Entertainment as opposed to anything else? What's useful?
No idea. I don't know.
But Mark says these are categories which are only useful to broadcasters. So if they're not even useful to you,
they're not particularly useful to us, really.
They get changed.
I mean, I don't know so much about the BBC, but at Channel 4, I don't think most of our regular providers particularly have a problem with it, in the sense that there is a documentaries department with 3 or 4 people in it. There is a Factual Entertainment department with 3 or 4 people in it. Some people in the documentaries department make some constructed shows. Some people in the Factual Entertainment department make some more pure documentary show. The film that was premiered here at Sheffield, Thriller in Manila on Wednesday night, was commissioned by the Factual Entertainment department. So I think commissioning, when it works, is about relationships. And I have relationships with producers have relationships with me, or they might have it with Simon Dixon or with Hamish McCura. And you work with people who understand where you're coming from, who like the same ideas as you, who you can have a kind of productive, collaborative dialogue with. And you know, I think it's a great strength of Channel 4 that if you've got an idea that you love, you can, and you've got a relationship with me, and it's a straight doc idea, brilliant, I can commission it because the boundaries are blurred. I think much harder for people who aren't within our system, in the sense of, you know, new people setting up companies, people from abroad, people who aren't the key suppliers to the channel, find it hard to navigate. But it ain't that complicated. Find a commissioner who you get on with, look at what their output is, see if you've got something in common. I think every commissioner has a kind of taste, and they fight for their projects to get through to be financed. And I think it's a great strength, and I don't think the boundaries should be rigid, because we're all creative as well. You know, a lot of the commissioners I was a documentary maker, and so I have documentary sensibilities, but I also like big mainstream factual programmes that draw a big audience. And I don't think the word entertainment in factual entertainment is the word to be embarrassed about. I think being popular and being entertaining, whether you're following a person's story for 6 years in a kind of Hoop Dreams way, or doing something where you're trying to format to make something happen in a shorter period of time, we still need to make popular entertaining programmes. And you know, the challenges for us as commissioners is to find fresh ideas and to get an audience excited. And you know, I have meetings with people where they say, I'd really like to do something about, I don't know, step parenting, or now that's the point at which the decision is made about whether it should be Fact 10 or a documentary. It's sort of that point. I don't have on my order list X number of constructed docs, X number of straight docs. I say, here's a subject. Can we shine a new documentary light onto it in a straightforward way? Is it new enough and exciting enough to just point a camera at and send a director in and spend a long time? And sometimes, yes, it is. And other times we say, well, actually, we want to talk about, I don't know, in the clip you saw, Boys and Girls Alone, which is one of mine, we really wanted to talk about cotton wool parenting and the fact that children don't stray very far from their homes on their own anymore, and that parents really mollycoddle. But a straight documentary about parents who are like that didn't feel like it would be interesting, and so we created a constructed environment where we created a boys' village and a girls' village and just took the parents away and saw what the children did over the next 2 weeks. So it's horses for courses, construction when construction can tell you something new.
Why did you think that what you call the straight documentary, why did you think that the documentary approach wouldn't be interesting?
I felt that I'd seen that, heard about it, read about it in the paper, and the challenge is to always try and say something new, or say it in a new way.
I mean, can I just say something? That wouldn't be a creative documentary necessarily, because I mean, it's a subject that's sort of been around for a long time, and you can understand why you would choose to give a new twist on it, totally.
Yeah.
But it's also about what is commissioned and what subject matters. I mean, most of the stuff there that was formatted and entertaining was English-based kind of Daily Mail lifestyle television programming. And to come in with a subject from outside is much more difficult, isn't it? So
I think
that's also kind of, so you're looking at the same subjects that have been done for years and years and years and trying to find a new way to present them to the audience.
Yes.
Let's come back to that. Benita, I mean, because you work in both of these kind of territories. You know, you, like me, spend your life pitching to people like Dominique and trying to figure out these figure out these different categories. So from a sort of independent producer's perspective, you know, are these categories helpful? Are they frustrating? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they are helpful. I mean, I agree with Dominique in that I think entertainment, for example, is not a bad thing. I mean, I happen to think entertainment is a good thing, and you could say potentially that if necessity is the mother of invention, perhaps entertainment is the mother of creativity. I mean, I think that we're in really exciting times. I love the fact that boundaries are being pushed and definitions are blurred, because for me, I don't like the idea that anybody sort of owns documentary and that documentary is a static thing. I like moving forward, pushing boundaries, and I think that's what's exciting. And yesterday when Hamish Mycura talked about having just talked about the kind of breadth of commissions from his documentary department at Channel 4, and mentioned quiz shows. I mean, would I go so far as to say a quiz show comes under the ban of documentary? I don't know, but maybe there's an element of that could do, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's an exciting thing, and I think for particularly sort of new filmmakers coming up, I think these are actually great times. But I think that there's sort of a lot of bad press about that. I think people see the entertainment word and think it's all dreadful, and I really don't believe that's the case. I mean, I think we're seeing some fantastic work at the moment, in these kind of times of supersized telly when everything has to be kind of, scaled up and it's all about big brands. But I'm just saying I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we're seeing some very good work that comes out of that might not otherwise if it were in a different, more kind of restrictive environment.
But do you think, I mean, Sean talked earlier about the fact that there's a certain kind of documentary that is getting squeezed out that we have a shade, we do have a shade. I mean, I think everyone who's involved in pitching, everyone involved in making programs, recognises there is an emphasis on format points, there is an emphasis on returnability. I mean, there's an emphasis on ratings, frankly.
I think that's much more coming from the big indies. The returnability question is not something that is coming from the broadcasters. It's much more about, it makes a lot more sense if you're a big indie and you've got to hit your numbers, you having something that comes back again and again. We quite often have people pitch me things and I say, do you know what, I think it's really interesting, but I think it's a single. Why don't you just do it in a straight obdoc single way? And it can go into cutting edge, or this literally happened to me yesterday. Don't want to do it. Don't want to do it because financially they're just not interested. So we sort of, and I know that's a different sort of person from, a single auteur documentary maker who's got their own little company and is doing their own thing. but the industry is driven so much, as well as by broadcasters, by big indies.
But then, Dominic, I mean, I think, you know, if you, I mean, I know, you know, going to any sort of briefing sessions at any of the channels, I mean, the buzzwords that you hear are all about big brands and returnability. I mean, I think that I hear what you're saying, and I've definitely had that experience. I think, you know, with you, I might have an idea, and you may have said, actually, maybe this, you know, maybe this would make a better single. And I think, yes, I think you do hear that, but I think the more kind of popular thought is actually that everybody wants their big brands because that's the nature of the business.
Because they're the things that cut through and bring you
Absolutely,
an audience.
and
yeah.
that's what it's about, cutting through, isn't it? So.
Are you really, let me clear with this, are you really saying that actually you can't get people to make single documentaries for you? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I tend to see, but part of my remit is
There's
to
a couple
find...
of people here, I think, who might be willing to fill the gap. Anyway, no, but seriously though.
Part of my, obviously, ordinarily an auteur type documentary I wouldn't be their first port of call because that isn't particularly my remit. I can stray where I like, but ultimately I do have to provide the channel with the big brands and Wife Swap and Supernanny and all of those things. What's Joe Frost going to do next comes out of my department, and that's the stuff that I wrestle with daily. But I'm saying that from the people that I regularly see, every now and then, like Benita says, something comes along, you're like, just do it as a single, just do it straight. It's a really interesting subject. And it's the big companies don't find that interesting. I'm not saying individual documentary filmmakers don't find it interesting. Of course they do, because that's their passion and that's what they want to do, and they follow their heart and they follow their project, and they don't have 100 people to pay the wages of. But I think it's naive to say that the movement towards returnability is led entirely by broadcasters, because I think these days telly is as much, and the direction it goes in is much led by the super indies as it is by the broadcasters, who are as powerful.
Well, I'm looking forward to the day where I can actually dictate to a broadcaster what they're going to commission from me. But
Alex,
eventually
Dominic is certainly right. Companies like RDF do not like doing single indies, and when the directors in RDF come up with notions of single indies, mostly they think this is not worth our trouble or our bother.
Not worth the
She's
trouble.
quite right.
But I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the crux of what we ought to be talking about today. But I do think, yes, I think there's less space for individual documentaries, although we have more single cutting edges. I should know the number. I think it's like 40 or something.
It's loads.
More than we have for the last 7 or 8 years of single, one-off, unconstructed single documentaries. And
Can I say something about that? Because I've watched a few cutting edges recently, and in their tone, and a lot of, I mean, I mentioned a specific idea, the one about the street, for example, which is a lovely idea to make a film about everybody that lives on your street. For me, it was kind of, the essence of it was fine, but it was ruined by like this narration all the time, and every time after the break you recapped on the stories. It's that kind of thing that makes the difference between a kind of creative documentary where you've got space and time and you're not obsessed with all those things that kill the form and structure and shape of a film. I mean, they're really important things to the likes of me and Sean and people.
I think it's a classic example of the Prescott thing that went out recently, where he disgraced himself and they laid this silly music over the whole thing there. Had it been treated in a much more straight way and they'd have dealt with him in a more serious way, I think there'd have been a more, instead of treating him like Les Dawson, there'd have been a more interesting film as a result. But there were that potentially an interesting straight 2-part documentary was fucked up because of the crossover.
I mean, and you have to ask yourself, does that really make a difference to the audience? I mean, maybe it does, but maybe it does, and that's a separate question, and that's fine.
Maybe
but then
that makes it more watchable now that the audience are trained. They need this light music. They need to kind of be taken through it.
I think these questions are really important, of like the sort of finer details within the program itself. Because it can really change the whole feel of a kind of a film. And there's a difference between a film and just a program that you watch and then you forget about tomorrow morning and never think about it ever again, and something that has some kind of longevity to it. And I mean, that's
I mean, I don't personally agree that an authentic documentary is one that doesn't have commentary.
It's not the commentary itself, it's the tone of it, the tone of the commentary.
But it's certainly true that Sue Bourne, who directed that film, made the film more or less, as she saw fit. There isn't a rule book of cutting edge that you have to do this.
If she was sat here and you asked her, would you prefer after every break to recap on what you've just seen in the last part, I'm sure she wouldn't say, yes, I I would really love to have done that. I mean, that's not true. I mean, it's something that's forced on a film by broadcasters, and that's fine if you think that's what, you know,
Like the 9 p.m.
that's the
slot.
reality of it. And, you know, but for me, these things are really important because they spoil there's a lack of respect for the audience to project their own imagination onto what they're seeing. That's the key thing. That's interesting to discuss.
I think Lie of the Land, Molly Dineen's film.
Yeah, but that's a really good narration.
It's very one-off, though. It's a very exceptional piece
So
of work.
you're talking about whether the narration is well written or badly written, in essence.
It's most narration, and, you know, from examples and clips there, is very, very patronising. It's just telling you what you're seeing, and not only telling you what you're seeing, it tells you what you see, and then it probably reminds you what you've just seen afterwards as well.
That's just bad narration.
That
There's
is
a lot
just
of
bad
people
narration.
who are not good at writing commentary.
But these things about tone and narration are really important, and
But it's not the
But
commissioners
a lot of that's
who want
imposed
crap
on the 9
narration.
o'clock cutting-edge strand. That's imposed on to carry a big audience, I think.
Not really. Did you see The Boy Whose Skin Fell Off?
Yeah.
That had reasonably deadpan narration, and yet it got about 5 million viewers. It did terrifically, and nobody was asking to put some crappy narration
So
on.
why do they bother with the rest of the cutting-edge series? There's 2 perfect examples where it worked, Land of the Light and there. So why is the whole series of cutting-edge dealt with in this way?
I think because commentary is very, very tough to write. That's actually what I think.
But
And
what
therefore
Mark was
people-
alluding to is when they go to a commercial break, there's this kind of catch-up commentary, just in case, just to recap where we
Again,
were
the
at.
way that's written can be not what you've just seen and what you're about to see. It can be cleverer than that, and it can start off either with the scene that says that, or it can start off with a few words that don't tell you exactly what you're going to see.
But it wasn't long ago that we didn't need that. Why do we need it now?
I'm not sure that we absolutely do, and I don't...
I think that point's really important about this. There's this perception that people who watch television, and, you know, some of it's true that we watch it, it's just consumed slightly out the corner of your eye sometimes. You know, that's fine for a lot of programs, but, you know, for documentaries, I think people will come to them, and, you know, and you can respect the fact that they will take it in, digest it, you know, as a mature adult, and actually bring something to it and be able to project onto it. You know, and there are, you know, those spaces exist, but they're becoming a lot smaller, and that's a kind of tragedy, really.
Certainly.
Sorry,
All right.
no, go on.
Well,
Sorry,
one last
no.
thing, which is I have doing a lot of building work at the moment. I have a very English, very ordinary builder. Yesterday morning, he said to me, he hasn't talked about television at all. We've been working slowly building for a year. He just said, "Did you see that family?" So I said, "No." He said, "It's really fantastic." He said, "Yeah, what's so good about it is," he's just a rough builder, he said, "it's got no narration. So what you're seeing is real." He said, "I know it's edited, but it
Even
just feels
builders
more
agree now,
real." I was just really, really surprised. Maybe you're completely right. Maybe there's a real feeling that we've over-mediated.
Yeah, I think so. It's just gone too far. There's nothing wrong with narration. It's fine, you know. And you know, I'm sure there's narration in Sean's film that we're going to see later on tonight, and it's the kind of tone of it, you know. It's
But
just,
I think, just to move this discussion on, because it seems to me that what's quite interesting about this debate happening now is that, you know, and I'm sure most of you here too, have sort of been in sessions not too different from this over the years, you know, where we have the kind of the debate about the embattled documentary versus factual entertainment. But I've had conversations in the last few months with people running networks, I mean, here and in the US, I mean, not commissioning editors, but actually sort of network heads, who say to me, we're really worried now that we have reached a point where the schedules are homogeneous. Everything, you know, with due respect to your colleague Sue Murphy, you know, everything on Channel 4 looks like a Sue Murphy show, you know, and that is bad for Channel 4. You know, it's actually, and to be honest, let's be blunt, Channel 4's ratings right now are not performing particularly well. You know, Channel 4 is having a tough time in the current climate. So are we actually, are we at a, and similarly, I had a similar conversation with someone from Discovery, you know, are we at a point now where we may actually have reached a kind of format fatigue? The broadcasters may actually themselves acknowledge that they've gone too far here, that actually it's kind of like the breakfast cereal has got just too bland, you know, we've kind of lost the nuts and the bits of fruit that kind of make it interesting, and it's now some kind of sort of giant box of Weetabix, you know, sort of, you know. I mean, from a broadcaster's point of view, are we actually at a point where actually there may be or at least broadcasters are saying this. I mean, I think there's a debate, perhaps we can have, about whether there's a gap between what the broadcasters are saying they want and the commissioning decisions they actually make. But they do seem to be coming around to this.
I think that is absolutely true. I think, well, you feel it as a viewer, but you also feel it as a commissioner, that there is a kind of sameness. There's a sameness across the channels. There's a sameness across departments. And there is definitely, you sort of feel like we're at a time when we're waiting for the new thing or trying to find the new thing to kick through. I think the really interesting, I think that is absolutely true, and I think that's across the board. All the broadcasters are saying, what's the new thing, what's the new thing? We feel like the ideas that are coming to us are quite samey, but the real question is, what's the response to that? Okay, if everything's the same, is the response to that to go back to the documentaries that we used to make, the golden age of documentaries that everybody talks about and not quite sure when it was and what they are? Because that, I don't think
I think
is
people
the
are quite
answer.
sure what they were and what they are. And the thing is, they, you know, they last, you know. And the reason why there's a tradition is because they have kind of longevity.
But when you look at histories of pop music, fashion, television, the answer to when you come to the end of a line, and I don't think we've come to the end of a line, but I certainly think of a certain type of Supernanny formatted documentary. I certainly haven't commissioned returnable, episodic, expert-led, expert walking up the garden path, finding a problem, going in there, bish bosh, solving it and walking away again as your narrative arc. I haven't commissioned one of those for a long time, and hardly anyone else has in the channel. But so I'm not arguing that those sort of shows should last forever, but I am arguing with the idea that in response to the homogeneity, we should return to very pure, observational, long documentaries without commentary or with minimal commentary. That
It's
might
not
be
that.
one
It needs
answer,
to reflect what's
but
going
I
on in the
think there
country.
might
The
be
commissioning,
another
the film,
answer
the
out there
programming
that's
needs to be
new.
reflecting what's going on in the country, and it can be formatted or whatever. And I think that's what the fatigue is. We're not seeing what the fuck's going on in
It's
the
also
place where
subject
we live
matter.
anymore.
Channel 4 once said we're now post-political and, you know, we don't want any political films or whatever, and like the working class don't exist, and it's all this kind of middle ground lifestyle programming which just reflects our lives back to us in a quite a bland way often.
I think that's what people are
Why
reacting
not
to when the
expand the
builder
range of
sees the
subject
family.
matter?
It's because they're seeing something real for a moment. That's what people are crying out for now. We're about to go into a recession. Are you commissioning anything on that? You know, is that returnable formats?
Well, the BBC
people losing
have got
houses.
a whole new series about the credit crunch Britain, haven't they?
There are. I mean, there are some. I think there's some fantastic work at the moment there. I mean, I don't know how many of you saw Jane Triese's film Heroine and Me. I mean, I thought that was an extraordinary film. I think some easy to sort of, you know, get caught up in the idea that, you know, everything's homogenous. But actually, when you turn on the telly, I'm not convinced that it is. I mean, I do think there is some, you know, some very, very good work that we are seeing at the moment. I think for me, some of it comes back to, though, this sort of idea that I think some of it is, though, about risk-taking. And from my perspective, as somebody who's going in, you know, pitching to the broadcasters, I mean, I think what I'd like to see is more risk-taking, and I sort of take an element of what you say, Mark, in that, you know, sometimes there is an argument that, you know, that less is more, and that it's but that's more risky. If you have sometimes, you know, less intervention and less voiceover, then oh goodness, what are we going to be left with? You know, it can be more of a risk. So I think perhaps personally I would like to see more risk-taking. But at the same time, I'd always want to see a mix. I'd always want to see, you know, a very sort of, you know, rich, you know, output really, because we don't all want to be. If all we had on our screens were these, you know, beautiful, you know, intelligent, purely observational documentaries, if that's all there was.
A lot of them are very entertaining in a different kind of way.
I don't doubt that they are, but I think for me personally, you know, I'm interested in diversity and I'm interested in sort of richness. You know, when we look around this country, that's what we have. And I think that the way to reflect that and represent that is by having different forms. I think it would be a shame for anybody to sort of, like I say, take ownership of it and just have one singular thing. I think it's exciting that there's a mix. and I think it's important. But I personally would love to see some more risk-taking, because I think that will generate more creativity and more exciting work.
I mean, I think all they're asking for is maybe just a few more hours, you know. You're always going to have more hours than us, but just a few more would be nice, you know. 5 or 6, you know, whatever, just a few more to kind of...
There's lots more I'm more for you.
Yeah,
Not threatening to take over the whole of the television.
Yeah, we don't want to take over television, and I think documentaries are always going to be, the kind of documentaries that I'm interested in are always going to be, you know, they're not going to be able to compete with screaming kids and, you know, big fat men. I mean, there's no way, but a little few more hours, that's all, you know.
But would you ever think of stretching the form yourself? Would you ever think, okay, so I've made X number of films in this particular way, why don't you think everything's it feels a bit the same? I don't want to do that. Of course, you don't want to do
every project is a new challenge.
Don't want to do of course, you don't want to do a Supernanny. But would you ever say, here's a subject, I'm really interested in it, I'd quite like to do some construction with it. What happens if I take that cast of characters that I would normally film in their own homes and do something else with them? And you might find the new form.
I stood in a lift for a few months, the first film I'd done. I thought that was quite inventive. I mean, there's always ways to... And it's not... It depends. Like a lot of the construction, when you move people from reality, then becomes very fake, and all you get is the reality in another context, which is a sort of selling point, but it's not substantial, really. It doesn't really...
I
mean,
totally
maybe it's something
don't
to do with the kind of quality of film.
I don't agree. Sometimes you can get something...
I could make a film with kids in the way that you did with Boys and Girls Alone in their own homes. I mean, maybe it's just... You know, our younger filmmakers being allowed to kind of find their own voice.
But you know, can I just say one thing, Alex? Can I just say one thing? I would love to get brilliant filmmakers who understand craft, who understand documentary making, and get them to work on more constructive things, because I'm constantly battling with
trying to find people. But you won't find those people if there's no space for them to develop their own style and voice, apart from 2 years in a film school. You know, they need to have space. It takes a long time to build that up. You know, sometimes you make a really miserable film that, you know, the commissioner hates, but so what? You know, make that one and then try again and give people time to develop themselves. You know.
I want to come back to that point, Mark's point about film school and sort of the next generation of filmmakers in a moment. But I mean, for Mark and Sean, really, I mean, isn't there an argument that said that, you know, actually, you know, sort of 5 or 10 years ago, the kind of factual output was slightly, on television, was slightly moribund and a bit dull. And actually, the first wave of reality programming, you know, was genuinely, there was a sense of something different, a sort of slight, you know, actually the kind of the formatted documentary seemed like a new way to bring a new, you know, perhaps a new and a bigger audience. And what we're talking about now is that has slightly entered the kind of decadent phase. It's now just kind of slightly run out of steam and it's just become dull. And actually,
probably.
It's just overtaken the schedule.
Neil sat here, who's, you know, done early docu-soaps, and they came out of a very, very similar kind of, you know, approach to you know, modern times, or some inside stories, or old cutting edges, and it moved it on a bit because it came a soap and it was a 7-parter or sometimes a 28-parter, and you know, and that was how many years ago? I mean, many years ago. And now you're right. I mean, it's been going on for so long. But the great documentaries that people remember aren't that different in their form and structure and the aesthetics and the kind of approach to it, are no different from some of those great films that were being made 40, 50 years ago in their essential kind of approach to a subject. That doesn't really change very much, and it doesn't need to, you know. I mean, just to have a few more hours to do that, you know.